degree in medicine. So please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Eric. Hi, everyone. I'm Stefan Yembu, recently graduate from Cameroon, aspiring neurosurgeon.
Oh. Yeah, congratulations, my friend. Nice to have you.
Thank you, bro. Thank you.
Yeah. I will introduce myself. I'm Ulrich Sidney. I'm the founder of the Association of Future African Neurosurgeons, and I'm currently a research associate at Harvard Program in Global Surgery and Social Change. We have a newcomer, Dylan. Dylan, can you please introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'm Dylan, and final year medical student from Cameroon and member of the Association of Future African Neurosurgeons.
Hey, so please, everyone, please mute so that we can start with the presentations. Please mute your devices. So next up is Dr. Nuru. Like we said before, Dr. Nuru is a fourth-year medical neurosurgical resident at the WFNS Rabat Training Center. And Dr. Nuru, you have the stage. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Ulrich. Good evening, everybody. It is my pleasure today to present you this topic about cranial fossa posterior tumors. I am Beninese origin, but I am here in Morocco in WFNS Rabat Center of Training of New Neurosurgeons in Africa. So it is my pleasure today to present you this topic, and welcome everybody. John, I have to share my my screen. Okay. It is okay, John?
It is okay, Dr. Nuru.
Yes.
You can go ahead.
Okay, great. So today I will talk about cranial fossa posterior tumors. I will use this plan introduction. I will talk about anatomy background of FCP, but I know that my young colleagues told about this topic about anatomy of midbrain, cerebellum last time. So I will go quickly. Topographic of tumor, clinical form, paraclinical diagnosis, histology form, and management and prognosis. And we will conclude, and I will show you my reference. Due to the location of posterior fossa tumors, they share common presenting feature related to the development of hydrocephalus. They are histologically diverse with different underlying genetic mutation and prognosis. Magnetic resonance imaging of the brain and the whole spine should be performed following presentation to identify evidence of disease dissemination. The midline suboccipital approach is most commonly used for tumor resection. Gross total resection is advocated in most posterior fossa tumor types with variation arising in adjuvant therapy regimes. We have Cushing, who was the first person to report a large series of posterior fossa tumors. He published information about 61 patients with cerebellar medulloblastoma with mostly fatal outcome in 1930. Brain tumor continue to be among the top 10 causes of cancer-related death in the world. Brain tumors are the second most common solid tumors in children next to leukemia. Posterior fossa tumors are more common in children than in adults. Between 54% and 70% of all childhood brain tumors originate in the posterior fossa. About 50 to 20% of brain tumors in adults occur in the posterior fossa. I will go quickly about anatomy background. So the anatomy of cranial posterior fossa is like that. The floor of cranial cavity is divided into three distinct depressions. There are no as the anterior cranial fossa, middle cranial fossa, and here it is the cranial fossa posterior. All these parts, it is the cranial fossa posterior. Each fossa accommodates a different part of the brain. The posterior cranial fossa is the most posterior and deep of the three cranial fossa. It accommodates the brainstem and the cerebellum. The posterior cranial fossa is comprised of three bones. We have occipital bones and the two here occipital bone and the two parts of two temporal bones. It is bounded as follows, like anteriorly and medially, it is bounded by the dorsum cellae. We have here the dorsum cellae. The dorsum cellae of the sphenoid bone. This is large superior projection of bone that arise from the body of the sphenoid. Anteriorly and laterally, it is bounded by the superior border of the petrous, a part of the temporal bones, like you can see here. And the floor consists, and posteriorly, it is bounded by the internal surface of squamous part of the occipital bones. The floor consists of the mastoid part of the temporal bone and the squamous, condylar, and basilar part of the occipital bones. The posterior cranial fossa house the brainstem and cerebellum, and the brainstem is comprised of the medulla oblongata, pons, and midbrain, and continue down through the foramen magnum to become the spinal cord, like you can see here. Alongside the gross anatomical structure of the brainstem and cerebellum, the posterior cranial fossa also accommodates associated arteries and nerves. Some case structure will be discussed with regard to their foramina below. So we can see here the nerves and the interpeduncular fossa, the middle cerebral peduncle, the pons, the medulla, and the median fissure and the pyramid. And here you have the pretarsal fissure of cerebellum and two folliculus. About the foramina, there are several bone landmarks and foramina present in the posterior cranial fossa. A foramen is simple a hole that allows the passage of a structure, usually a blood vessel or nerve. Temporal bone, when we take temporal bone, we have the internal acoustic meatus in the oval opening in the posterior aspect of the pretus part of the temporal bones, and it transmits the facial nerves and the vestibulocochlear nerves and labyrinthine artery. I will go quickly, sorry. We have occipital bones, where is the large opening, the foramen magnum lies centrally in the floor of the posterior cranial fossa. Posterolaterally to the foramen magnum lies the cerebellar fossa. These are bilateral depressions that house the cerebellum. They are divided medially by a ridge of bone, the anterior occipital crest. The cerebellum is located at the back of the brain, immediately inferior to the occipital and temporal. And within the posterior cranial fossa, it is separated from this lobe by the tentorium cerebelli, a third layer of dura mater. It lies at the same level of the posterior to the pons, which it is separated by the fourth ventricle. You have here fourth ventricle here. Anatomical lobes, there are three in the cerebellum: the anterior lobe, the posterior lobe, and the folliculonodular lobe. These lobes are divided by two fissures, the primary fissure and the posterolateral fissure. And we have, to describe zones, there are three cerebellar zones in the midline. In the midline of the cerebellum is the vermis, like you can see here. It is the vermis. Either side of the vermis, we have the intermediate zone. Lateral to the intermediate zone, we have lateral hemisphere. There is no difference in gross structure between the lateral hemisphere and intermediate zone. The cerebellum can also be divided by function. There are three functional areas of the cerebellum: the cerebrocerebellum, the spinocerebellum, and the vestibulocerebellum. About the cerebrocerebellum, it is the largest division formed by the lateral hemispheres. It is involved in planning, movement, and motor learning. It is receives input from the cerebral cortex and point nuclei and send output to the thalamus and red nucleus. This area also regulates coordination of muscle activation and is important in visually guided movement. The spinocerebellum comprises of the vermis, an intermediate zone of the cerebral hemisphere. It is involved in regulating body movement by allowing for error correction. It is also receives proprioceptive information. About the vestibulocerebellum, the functional equivalent to the flocculonodular lobe, it is involved in controlling balance and ocular reflex, mainly fixation on a target. It receives input from the vestibular system and sends output back to the vestibular nucleus. I have to talk you quickly about CSF physiology. I think I talked about this topic when I done one presentation about hydrocephalus. You have to know that tumor fossa have big problem. It is about the LCF circulation, CSF circulation. So I will go quickly. About the vascularization, the cerebellum receives its blood supply from three arteries. We have superior cerebellar artery, anterior and inferior cerebellar artery (ICA), and the PICA, posterior inferior cerebellar artery. The superior cerebellar artery and the ICA are branches of the basilar artery. You can see here, which wrap around the anterior aspect of the pons before reaching the cerebellum. The PICA is a branch of the vertebral artery. We have the venous drainage of the cerebellum is by the superior and inferior cerebellum veins, and they drain into the superior petrosal transverse and straight dural venous sinus. I will talk to you about topography. I done one summarize here. We can see fossa craniofossa posterior tumors can be divided by occurs in children and adults. When you have children, you can see tumor in brainstem, tectum cerebellum can be involved, fourth ventricle, and angular cerebellopontine (ACP). About adult, I just done this classification like extraaxial tumors and intraaxial tumors. And about intraaxial, we can have parenchymal tumors and intraventricular tumors. The clinical forms, the signs and symptoms of posterior fossa tumors are typically not specific for pathology subtype. Rather, children with this tumor may present with a variety of signs and symptoms. The diagnosis is often difficult to establish in a child because many of the signs and symptoms may mimic those of more common childhood illness. Posterior fossa tumors often cause hydrocephalus by blocking cerebrospinal outflow pathway with the resulting signs and symptoms of raised intracranial pressure. Symptoms typically begin with intermittent headache, often worse in the morning, followed by vomiting and eventually gait disturbance. We can then perform fundoscopy with suspected posterior fossa of supratentorial tumor because papilla edema is a common finding. We have nerve palsies resulting from intracranial hypertension and ataxia from a combination of cerebellar compression and hydrocephalus are also common. The presenting signs and symptoms are dependent on the growth rate of tumor, the age of the patient, and the location of the tumor. Most children with tumors like medulloblastoma present with a short clinical history for less than 1.5 months in approximately half of patients and less than 3 months in approximately 75% of patients. Ependymoma are relatively fast-growing tumors, and the median duration of symptoms is 2 to 3 months. As for cerebellar astrocytoma, the symptomatic period range from 5 to 9 months and is usually significantly longer than other posterior fossa tumors. Rapid sudden deterioration in neurological status may result from acute obstructive hydrocephalus or hemorrhage into either the tumor or the subarachnoid space. Older children may complain of headache, neck stiffness, dizziness, or diplopia. On neurological examination, they will demonstrate truncal or appendicular ataxia, dysmetria, nystagmus, or cranial nerve palsy. In comparison with older children, the presentation in infants and young children is often more insidious with gradual progression. The diagnosis is suspected in the setting of irritability, loss of appetite, weight loss, and failure to breathe. In addition, they may display signs of increased ICP, including lethargy, drowsiness, vomiting, sunsetting about eyes, a full fontanelle, or an increased head circumference in infant forms. The midline tumor of the cerebellum usually causes truncal ataxia, whereas hemispheric lesion cause ipsilateral dysmetria. Tumor in the obex and the area postrema cause vomiting, even if the tumor is small and there is no hydrocephalus. Cranial neuropathies such as facial weakness, hearing loss, and swallowing dysfunction about mixed nerves, nerves involvement may present in tumor that exceed the foramen of Loschka from the cerebellopontine angle or in tumor demonstrating brainstem invasion. We can have also right title, signifying descent of the cerebellar tonsil into the foramen magnum with compression of the C1 or C2 nerves roots may be observed. Development of stiff neck or head tilt usually suggests tonsillar involvement by the tumor of sign of impending herniation. Rarely, children initially present with symptoms of spinal dissemination, such as back and leg pain or paraparesis, but it is rare. The transmission of increasing pressure to the upper cervical spinal cord may cause syringomyelia and related symptoms in patients with cerebellar astrocytoma. We go about paraclinical diagnosis type of description. You have to know that MRI is the gold standard imaging nowadays for diagnosis about fossa cerebral posterior tumors. We have here one case about medulloblastoma. We have in sagittal post-contrast imaging, and here and this axial view can show in typical. We have here typical posterior fossa medulloblastoma. Both demonstrate heterogeneous nature of the tumor. Obstruction of aqueduct, because we can find correctly the aqueduct. Obstruction of the aqueduct and secondary obstructive hydrocephalus, like you can see here, you have hydrocephalus. And this picture is about intraoperative view, but I will not talk about that. The class, we have here about one case about astrocytoma pilocytic. The classic appearance is a cerebellar mass consisting of a large cyst with a solid tumor nodule. However, the imaging spectrum of appearance may include cystic solid or a mix of cystic and solid presentation. We have here another case about ependymoma. In the cerebellopontine angle, the tumor is hypointense, you can see here, hypointense, and does not enhance. The brainstem is distorted and rotated on the right. And in FLAIR image, demonstrating a diffuse hyperintense lesion consistent with a pontine glioma that you can see here. Post-contrast axial, we can see the tumor is large and diffuse involving the cerebellum and the brainstem, and extend superiorly through the tentorial incisura. About the histological, we can see the tumor of brainstem. We can have glioma, ganglioglioma, and astrocytoma. About involvement about tectum cerebellum, we can have astrocytoma pilocytic, medulloblastoma, hemangioblastoma. About the foreventricular involvement, we can have medulloblastoma, ependymoma, choroid plexus papilloma, and about ACP, we can have schwannoma or meningioma. In adults, we can have about extracellular involvement, we can have vestibular schwannoma, meningioma, metastasis, glomus jugular, and paraganglioma tumor. About intraaxial involvement and about parenchymal involvement, you can have metastasis or hemangioblastoma. Intraventricular, you can have subependymoma, plexus choroid papilloma, and you can have a rare case about neurocytoma intraventricular. We talk about histology. Medulloblastoma is a primitive neuroectodermal tumor, PNET, occurring in the cerebellum. It is the most common malignant brain tumor in children and represents 30% of posterior fossa tumors. It is classified as a Roux grade 4 and has a propensity to leptomeningeal dissemination. The annual incidence is 6.5 per million children. 10% of cases are diagnosed in infancy, 75% occur in the midline. Cerebellar location is associated with older age and desmoplastic histology. Histologically, medulloblastoma is composed of small blue round cells with a high nuclear to cytoplasmic ratio. The 2007 Roux classification of central nervous system tumor identified 4 distinct pathological subgroups: classical, desmoplastic, medulloblastoma with extensive nodularity, and large cell variant. About the ependymoma, it is tumor of the third most common in pediatric brain tumor. Infratemporal ependymoma arise from the flower of roof of the fourth ventricle and grow into the ventricular lumen. They have a propensity to extend through the foramen of Luschka into the cerebellopontine system and around the brainstem, like I showed in last figure, as well as down through the foramen magnum. Infratemporal ependymoma in children are classified as Roux grade 2 or 3, grade 1 being reserved for only subependymoma and myxopapillary ependymoma. They are well delineated, soft, heterogeneous tumors, often with cystic, necrotic, and hemorrhagic elements. Histologically, they are characterized by perivascular and more rarely ependymal rosette. The latter consists of tumor cells concentrically organized around the lumen. I'm sorry I don't provide imaging about histology. We will let that for the neuroanatomopathologist. About the astrocytoma pilocytic, you can see here another case about astrocytoma pilocytic. Histologically, these tumors are characterized by a biphasic pattern consist of compact bipolar cells with horizontal fiber and loose multipolar cells with the microcyte and eosinophil granular bodies, which form globular aggregates within astrocytic process. Their slow growth permit development of regressive changes such as hyalinized vessels, calcification, necrosis, lymphocytic infiltrates, and cysts. In this context, necrosis carries no prognostic significance. Rarely, pilocytic astrocytomacyte, the neurasics, although this tends to occur with hypothalamic rather than posterior fossa primary tumors. In these cases, the primary tumor may still demonstrate a low proliferation index. Such tumors generally respond well to chemotherapy and radiotherapy, and long-term survival it is still possible. We have a case about atypical teratoid rhabdoid tumors histologically who consist of sheets of rhabdoid cells within a background of epithelial, mesenchymal, or neuroectodermal cells. Mitotic labeling typically shown in this of 50 to 100%. This is also abnormal in rhabdoid tumors outside the central nervous system, including the renal and extrarenal forms. Although the exact function of this gene is unknown, it is a component of an ATP-dependent chromatin remodeling complex and is involved in the regulation of transcription. The presence of an INI1 mutation in a tumor resembling TNET, even without sheets of rhabdoid cells, is still sufficient to secure the diagnosis of atypical teratoid rhabdoid tumor. We will go to talk about the management and prognosis. The goals of management is to fight about ways of ICP, remove tumor to fight FCP compression, avoid complication as soon as possible, prevent recurrence, and the mean we can use medical therapy like corticotherapy, drug anti-seizure, antalgic, and anti-vomiting. We have to sometimes to done CSF drainage like shunts or ventricular cisternostomy, endoscopy. Sometimes we can use external shunt if it is so emergency. Surgical treatment, it is excision of tumor. And we have to, for histological forms, to add radiotherapy and or chemotherapy. The surgical treatment consists upon diagnosis of a posterior fossa tumor, any immediate threat to the child's life need to be dealt with urgently. Most commonly, this is severe obstructive hydrocephalus that may warrant rapid ventricular drainage. If the child is severely obtended as a result of hydrocephalus, urgent external drainage should be performed. However, in most cases, the child will improve, sometimes dramatically, with urgent administration of steroids, like dexamethasone. This can obviate the need of external ventricular drainage and should be tried first. This usually provides an adequate temporizing measure until the tumor is resected and normal CSF flow patterns are reestablished. Preoperatively, it can be difficult to confirm the exact type of tumor one is dealing with. However, virtually all types of pediatric posterior fossa tumor will benefit, at least in the short term, from surgical decompression. In the previous section, it was stated that complete surgical resection appears to be an important prognosis factor. Therefore, every effort should be made to perform as complete a resection as is safely possible. An important preoperative investigation is full neurosynthesis staging with MRI. The result of this may have a significant impact on the goal of surgery, specifically if distant metastases are clearly observed. This will certainly dampen one's enthusiasm for performing a gross total resection. This can be the deciding factor in determining how aggressively to proceed in resecting a difficult adherent tumor, for example. About the operative technique, I will go brief description because it's not the goals about our topic today. The major challenge in the surgical resection of ependymoma, for example, is in resecting the more difficult posterior fossa lesion. A brief description of the operative approach following with particular attention to complication and avoidance. The child is placed in a prone position with the neck flexed like here. Head fixation may be used for older children. A ventricular drain is usually not needed. Mannitol and additional dexamethasone are given. A standard exposure of the posterior fossa is then performed. You can see here. Ependymoma frequently extend below the foramen magnum, and close examination of the preoperative MRI will reveal the extent of such extrusion. If there is extension into the upper cervical spine, this will need to be exposed operatively. So an excellent exposure is essential in order to maximize the chance of complete resection, and this should not be compromised. Once an adequate bony exposure has been performed, the occipital bone is removed through a bilateral craniotomy. Enough bone must be removed in order to just visualize the transverse sinus bilaterally. That is the landmark about the approach. The removal of the posterior arc of C1 will be detected by the extent of tumor seen on the preoperative MRI. Once epidural hemostasis has been obtained, the dura is opened widely in a standard Y-shaped fashion, and the dura leaves carefully reflect back. The brain may be under significant pressure. This pressure can usually be relieved by releasing CSF from the cisterna magma. It is fails ventricular. If this fails, we can use ventricular cannulation may rarely be necessary. Initial inspection of the operative field should be performed to identify evidence of gross arachnoid tumor spread. If present, this should be sent for pathological examination for extemporaneous. As well as CSF is being released, this should be saved and sent for cytological examination. At this point, it is important to identify the key surgical landmark. This included the obex, pica on both sides, and if possible, the lower cranial nerves. This initial inspection may also demonstrate tumor exclusion into the CPA or upper cervical spine. The tumor is most commonly found in the far ventricle itself, and to allow for complete exposure, the lower vermis may be split by transvermian approach in the midline or alternatively a telovelar approach, incorporating incision of the thalacoroid, and the inferior medullary velum may be used. With the tumor exposed, a sample of tumor should be sent for intraoperative pathology assessment to confirm the diagnosis. What about the adjuvant treatment? Following resection, further adjuvant treatment of medulloblastoma depends on whether they are classified as standard or high risk. Staging requires MRI of the brain and spine without and with contrast. CSF from the lumbar region is also required. This is obtained 2 weeks post-operatively to avoid false positive cytology yearly after resection, and is more sensitive than ventricular CSF. High-risk patients include all children under 3 as well as those with positive CSF, macrometastasis on MRI implying tumor dissemination and superior 1.5 centimeter of residual tumor visible on post-contrast MRI within 24 to 72 hours of surgery. Children older than 3 with anaplastic histology or CMYC amplification are also considered high risk. Children over 3 at standard risk undergo craniospinal irradiation, 23.4 grades, commenced within 40 days of surgery with a posterior fossa boost to a total dose of 54 to 55.8 grades. This is combined with weekly concurrent chemotherapy. Sometimes you can use hyperfractionation, but does not lead to an improvement in overall of progression-free survival. Based on this regimen, 5 years event-free survival is up to 80%. I will talk about prognosis astrocytoma of astrocytoma pilocytic. The extent of surgical resection is a major determinant of outcome in this case, in this type of astrocytoma pilocytic. Pilocytic astrocytoma maintain their Roux grade 1 status for years. They only rarely show malignant transformation, and they should then be termed anaplastic pilocytic astrocytoma rather than glioblastomas. Even then, their prognosis is not uniformly poor. A reported case had undergone previous radiotherapy, and this was likely relevant to their transformation. A large percentage of pilocytic astrocytoma, particularly those arising within the cerebellar hemisphere, have demonstrated alteration in the BRAF gene, which is essential for growth signaling through mitogen-associated protein kinase pathway. This alteration have not been clearly associated with outcome. P16 deletions are common in midbrain, brainstem, and spinal cord lesions. Resection is the treatment of choice for well-circumscribed lesions, and the factor most strongly associated with outcome is the extent of surgical removal. Gross total resection leads to over 90% long-term survival. Cerebellar pilocytic astrocytoma are generally resectable, and adjuvant therapy is not indicated. Those arising from the brainstem, however, are often not completely resectable and require adjuvant chemotherapy, usually including carboplatin and vincristine, and the consideration of radiotherapy at progression. I will talk about prognosis of medulloblastoma. Historically, the 5 years progression-free survival for children with high-risk disease is 40%. Recent studies have focused on improving prognosis in the group using multimodality treatment. High-risk patients are treated with 36 gray to the craniospinal axis, followed by a posterior fossa boost to 54 to 56 gray. Some studies have evaluated the use of hyperfractionated radiotherapy, including posterior fossa boosts to 60 gray and myeloablative course of chemotherapy, followed by peripheral blood stem cell rescue, yielding 5 years progression-free survival of up to 73%. The neurocognitive sequelae of radiotherapy are more severe in young children. In infants and children under 3, repeated cycles of chemotherapy has been used after surgery in an attempt to prevent progression until they become eligible for radiotherapy. Outcomes from early studies were poor, encouraging the introduction of high-dose chemotherapy regimens. It is likely that such studies were affected by multiple tumor biological factors which directly affected survival. Infants with desmoplastic variant, for example, consistently showed better outcome than all the others. Prognosis about ependymoma. Despite several multi-institutional studies, most including platinum-based agents, no single chemotherapeutic regimen has demonstrated significant survival benefit for ependymoma. The role of chemotherapy alongside post-operative radiotherapy remains unclear. In a recent single-institution study, conformal radiotherapy administered immediately after surgery led to better overall survival rates up to 85% at 5 years, compared to early studies with up to 73% at 5 years. This may be partly attributable to the high rates of gross total resection in these studies. Radiotherapy was confined to the tumor bed and on 10 millimeters margin, and was also administered for the first time to children under 3 years. Children under 18 months received 54 gray rather than the standard dose of 59.4 grays. The 7 years local control rate was 87%. Among the patients with differentiated ependymoma treated with gross total resection and 59.4 grade, there were very few local failures. The low frequency of side effect from limited volume irradiation has also encouraged this group to recommend repeated surgery and re-irradiation for children presenting with local recurrence. Prognosis about brainstem tumors. When we have fossa cerebral posterior who involving brainstem, they generally do not enhance with contrast when we perform MRI. Surgical resection has no role in this tumor. We have to know that. I think maybe I will talk later about this study that I done about DIPG tumors, the experience of my center and the management nowadays since 1975 to nowadays, and we showed that there is no benefit nowadays to go to harm brainstem, to go to perform surgical resection about brainstem DIPG. So, despite several clinical trials over the last 15 years, based on various chemotherapeutic agents and radiotherapy delivery technique, there has been no improvement in clinical outcome. Focal gliomas are discrete solid or cystic tumor under 2 cm in diameter and are commonly low-grade astrocytoma. In a recent large retrospective study of focal brain glioma, following 52 children over a mean of 10 years, the survival rate was 90% at 5 years and 90% at 10 years. 5% underwent gross or near total resection. The author recommends that surgery should be pursued if the tumor is considered accessible and the family understands the risk of new neurological deficit. In other situations, the author recommends stereotactic biopsy followed by radiation for clinical or image-based progression. About prognosis about atypical teratoid rhabdoid tumor, treatment of atypical teratoid rhabdoid tumor consists of combination of surgery, multi-agent chemotherapy and radiotherapy. Median overall survival for a large cohort was 70 months. Patients with gross total resection had longer survival than subtotal resection of biopsy. Survival for children under 3 years old who also had radiotherapy was 50.8 months compared to 70.9 months for those who did not. Variability in chemotherapy regimens in conjunction with a small number of children has made it difficult to establish the comparative efficacy of different agents. Intrathecal chemotherapy has been shown to be of benefit in some patients. In conclusion, posterior fossa tumors are well known for their complication with high morbidity and mortality because of their location, risk in excision of lesion and involvement of brainstem structure and foreventricle. Due to the advent of recent diagnosis and treatment modalities, early diagnosis is possible, which help in reducing the mortality rate and also improve the prognosis post-operatively. Also, you have to know the surgery technique is really a challenge for neurosurgeons and need good line curve to perform FCP surgery. So this is my reference. And I thank you for your kind attention, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nuru. Thank you very much. Are there any questions?
You're welcome.
Do we have any questions, please?
Thank you. I have a comment.
Yes, Dr. Kabulo, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nuru. This was a wonderful presentation. And thank you for choosing this topic. This is one of the beautiful topics in neurosurgery. I think it was comprehensive and everyone got his meal, his piece. So maybe next time you can also add you use the WHO 2007 classification. There's already a WHO 2016. Yeah, if you can add the 2016, it will be better. Yeah, this is a nice topic because from the history already, you can have an idea about posterior fossa tumor. When you are talking to the mother, when you are after taking the history, you can have an idea that this is a posterior fossa. The mother will tell you, like Dr. Nuru was emphasizing, truncal ataxia, appendicular ataxia. The mother will tell you that the baby is falling, especially if the tumor is on the left side. The mother will tell you that the baby was falling on the left side. If the tumor is midline, the mother will tell you that the baby was falling either anteriorly or posteriorly. That truncal ataxia. And sometimes you will see those babies, they are drooling saliva due to lower cranial nerves palsy. They are drooling saliva. Sometimes there is history of choking. The mother will tell you that the baby was like, and usually in Africa, the mother will be shouting at the baby, why are you walking like that? Without knowing that there's something which is wrong. Maybe it's an ataxia, but the mother would think like the baby is mimicking someone who used to walk like that, sometimes beating even the child. Why are you walking like that? So it's a very nice topic. So from the history already, and also there's something Dr. Nuru was talking about, is from the history, you can get your idea which type of tumor is that. There is what is called Robin's rule. The Robin's rule is if you get like an ependymoma or medulloblastoma, those are coming from the floor of the fourth ventricle. The baby will start by vomiting, then the headache will come later. But if it's like cerebellar astrocytoma, the baby will start with the headache, then the vomiting later. Because ependymoma, medulloblastoma, they are in the floor of the fourth ventricle. They are irritating the area post-rema. They are also irritating the nucleus of the vagus nerve. So the baby will present with the vomiting before headache. So thank you so much, Dr. Nuru. I really appreciate this. It was wonderful. Thank you.
You're welcome, Dr. Kabulo.
Thanks, Dr. Kabulo. Please, can you come again on the difference between the astrocytoma and the ependymoma?
Yes,
yes,
please. I meant you can have an idea from the history if it's a medulloblastoma or ependymoma, or it's a cerebellar astrocytoma. So one side is medulloblastoma and ependymoma, another side you have cerebellar astrocytoma. For ependymoma and medulloblastoma, usually they come from the floor of the fourth ventricle, where they are irritating the area post-rema and also the nucleus of the vagus nerve. So the baby will start by vomiting before the headache. Because remember, in posterior fossa, once you have headache, it means there's raised ICP, there's obstructive hydrocephalus. Then you get vomiting before headache. But if it's cerebellar astrocytoma, you get headache first, then vomiting later. It is called Robin's rule.
Yes, it is important, and you can also achieve that when the mom come to tell you. You can find the history of disease. If the mom tell you no, it is 1 month or 3 months approximately, you can according about what Dr. Kabulo said, you can also know that maybe it is medulloblastoma. But we have I have one remark to add. It is when the infant is so young, histologically you can think about some histology tumors. But because between 1 year, maybe 1 year to 5 years, we know that we have first medulloblastoma, after astrocytoma pilocytic, and also we can have ependymoma or ATRT tumors. But after 5 years, when we after 5 years to maybe 50 years, when you see you have clinical form presentation, you can also think about first stable it is astrocytoma pilocytic, after ependymoma, and after medulloblastoma or hemangioblastoma. But in adults, you have to think first about metastases, and after ependymoma or astrocytoma pilocytic or hemangioblastoma, or plexus choroid papilloma, and also. So about the history of clinical, you can also, with clinical signs and symptoms, you can also you can combine both and think about one aspect of one histological tumor you have. But all that, it is it is high suspicion. But the real challenge is in perioperatively and the cytology and histological examination to confirm the diagnosis.
Thank you so much, Dr. Noru. That's a good precision. It depends on the age of the patient for you to think, because there's an order. If I have a child from 0 to 5 or to 3, I would think my first one will be like this. If it's an adult, like Dr. Noru is saying, in adult, especially females, you get a posterior fossa lesion, a cerebellar lesion. The first is metastasis, the second metastasis, the third metastasis, then you think about something else. Usually metastasis comes the first one. Young ladies, you can think about a angioblastoma, then you put other things. So there is always something which is first according to the epidemiology, according to the age of the patient. And also, Dr. Noru, you were talking about the approaches. Usually here we prefer the telovela approach than the transvermium approach.
Yes, I agree with you. Yes, telovela approach is better.
Because if you do a transvermium, you have to the vermis, then there's a risk of getting cerebellar mutism after operation.
Mutism after surgery, yes.
Yeah, yes. With the telovera, you don't cut any structure, you're just using the anatomical landmark. We do telovera approach, yes.
Yes, I recommended you, Ulrich, and other of you to go to see the video of Professor Gado-Cohen. He showed beautiful video about telovela approach. It's beautiful. And you can see that.
Yes, thank you very much. We've been blessed today. We've been blessed today to have two bright minds in Dr. Noru and Dr. Kabulo. So for those who are not aware, the recommendation from Dr. Noru was Neurosurgical Atlas. So you can download the application, you can sign up for free online, and you can actually go on YouTube. You'll find the videos. They have Dr. Gadol is a well-renowned neurosurgeon. He has a lot of videos. So just visit Neurosurgical Atlas, be it on Google or YouTube. You'll find all these videos. Also, you can add to that applications like Upsurgeon on Store, which is free as well. Thank you so much. Are there any other questions?
Yes, I have a question. I used to know, I used to know the occurrence of seizures in tumors of the posterior cranial fossa. Is there a difference between the occurrence of seizures in children and in adolescents? I mean, in children who are younger adolescents, is there any difference?
Sorry, can you put your microphone close to your mouth? We can't hear you.
I think the occurrence of...
Oh, okay, go ahead.
Yes, I wish to know the occurrence of seizures, the occurrence of seizures as a presentation in the posterior cranial fossa tumors. I wish to know, is there a difference between children and adolescents? If the occurrence of seizures, does it differ, or is the same? It has the same incidence, if you can put it like that.
Thank you, Zolo. Let me tell you that for you to have seizure, you need to have cortical irritation. So it's rare to get seizure in the posterior fossa. Once you get seizure, maybe there is obstructive hydrocephalus with supratentorial pressure, with the now compression of the cortex. It's very rare to get seizures with tumor in the posterior, with lesions in the posterior fossa. Usually seizure you get when there is a cortical irritation. I don't know if I've answered your question.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, is there anyone else with a question?
You know, about FCP tumors, we have to be you have to pay attention. You have to pay clearly attention about clinical, clinic examination. It is very, very important. If you've done good examination of your patient, you can't miss your diagnosis about FCP tumors, because in my short experience, I see many children who go to see doctor in pediatric, and they treat the child like gastro illness of gastrointestinal illness, because children vomiting, they think that maybe it is gastrointestinal, and they treat these children maybe, I don't know, 6 months, 7 months, but no with no releasing. So then they will come back to see another doctor who will done the diagnosis. It is not good. As soon as we ask, maybe you will, if you are not neurosurgeon, you have to pay attention about a child who have always vomiting, headache. You have to pay attention and perform good clinical examination, neurological. That is allow you to done the difference of gastrointestinal illness, or you have FCP tumors syndrome, cerebellar syndrome, or all these signs and symptoms can show you the way that you are front of FCP tumors. So it is important to done good examination clinical.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Noro. Here, what we did, we had a meeting with the pediatricians and also ophthalmologists, because we realized that many patients with tumors, pediatric tumors, they were admitted in pediatric ward. And after the patient now have deteriorated, they do a CT scan later or an MRI scan, then they transfer the patient to us. So we at the meeting, like once we get those patients with they are presenting with vomiting, headache, we have to see those patients together before we admit them. And also, like with the ophthalmologist, we had another meeting like that, because most of the patients with the pituitary tumor, they were starting to see the ophthalmologist who are prescribing specs after they become blind, they are now blind, then they transfer the patient to neurosurgeon. I think that's an important point. Once you are in a center where you are dealing with other specialties, it's better to talk to them and see how you can help those patients. That's a good point.
Yes, yes, exactly.
Okay.
So I am in Morocco, so I invite you us to come with me to enjoy my tea.
Thank you very much. So please don't be shy. If you have a question, you can ask now, so you can profit from this. Otherwise, you won't be able to make sure that your worries are answered. So please ask your questions.
I see that we have great followers: Stefan, Dylan, and Sydney. No, not Ulrich. I see another Sydney here, Fabrice. So you can go ahead and Cynthia, you can go ahead and give comment or question. What do you think about FCP tumors? And you have to tell you that have to be interactive session.
Okay, Dr. No, thank you for the presentation. I don't have question because I not well understand all the presentation, some part, but I will see the video, the presentation later, and if I have more questions, I will contact you to have some answer.
Okay, okay. Okay, you're welcome.
Please, Dr. Nuru.
Yes, Zolo.
It's not yet Zolo. It's me.
Stefan, yes.
I have two questions. It's more preoccupation than questions. My first preoccupation is about radiologic science. I wrote that in tumor of posterior fossa, you have some sign at MRI to know if it's an malign or benign tumors. In your presentation, you have talking about later. So I want to know if in the MRI cliché, is I see in T1, for example, an ISO intense type, not well differentiate, with no reaction after contrast product injection. Can I suggest is an malign one? Because in some books, I've read that some tumors who are in T1, ISO or EPO signal, and with no reaction after injection of contrast product, we can suggest, fourthly, strongly, I want to say that the tumor is malign. My second question is about the WHO classification. When we were speaking about the histology of the tumors, your classification for us who did not, our knowledge is too small. So we want to know, to make the correlation between the classification of WHO and the nature or the histologic part of the tumor, like if it's malign or not, what type of tumor is. So we want this thing for us to more understand exactly in front of what we are. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Stefan. About your first question, you are right when you talk about contrast, when the tumor take high contrast, that means it is malignant. But I want just to give you one precision about cerebral fossa posterior. To see your MRI, your image, and to think about if this tumor it is benign or malign, it depends, one, the age of your patient, the age. Two, clinical signs and symptoms, what that you have. The history of the signs and symptoms. And after, you can analyze if your tumor is in, you have 4 types: brainstem, if that is arising in brainstem, or it is focal, cerebellar, vermian, okay, or angle CP, okay. And if you have another signs like I told in medulloblastoma, if you have in spinal cord dissemination. So all that can allow you to know if this fossa cerebellar posterior tumors is, because medulloblastoma, it is not benign tumor, okay? It is classified by WHO grade 3, okay, or 4 sometimes,
2 or 4.
Okay. Astrocytoma pilocytic, you see it is grade 1 of WHO, okay? Astrocytoma pilocytic, you know that you can occur that in this range of age and the signs. And when you see that in imaging, you know that astrocytoma pilocytic, you have cyst. You have a cyst like liquid, you have cyst, and you have one part of solid tumor and second part who it is cyst. Okay, so in this case, in this case, it is astrocytoma pilocytic. The another tumor who going in fourth ventricle, you know that maybe it is ependymoma or subependymoma if they going into. But if there is the tumor of fourth ventricle, you can also think about plexus choroid papilloma or subependymoma or ependymoma. Okay, but that depends of location of your tumors. Okay, age, and like you say, if you have cyst or not. Okay, to know that you have Roux1 astrocytoma pilocytic or grade 2, like ependymoma, grade 3 for medulloblastoma, and also when you have when you have a brainstem tumor, you can also maybe you have astrocytoma or it is glioma, grade 4 or 5. Okay, glioma or ganglioglioma. Okay, when you have brainstem diffuse tumors. Okay, so it is like that. But you are right. If we take example for subtentorial tumors, okay, hemispheric tumor, you can know you agree with me. When you take extraaxial tumors like meningioma, you know that your take contrast is homogeneous. Okay, but when you have contrast who it is heterogeneous, like that, you can have suspicion about, yes, maybe it is malignant tumors. Okay, so that is that. Now about the classification, you have to know Roux1 it is benign. Okay, Roux1 it is benign. Also in 2007 and 2016, there is no big difference, but just about some classification subtype who be included in who 2016, but that not change globally. Roux1 it is benign. Okay, Roux2 it is moderate. 3, 4 malignant, but not with good prognosis. Okay, Roux5 it is the glioblastoma with poor prognosis. I would like to present to you. I don't know if you have time. Maybe not today because my presentation is ready. I was present this work in Zurich last May about DIPG brainstem tumors in children in childhood. This good work I done with literature to know if today it is there is a benefit to go to operate this tumor in children. Why not to go directly to chemotherapy and radiotherapy? Because you know brainstem, if you go to operate, you have many risks. Lost your patient. Okay, so I will present this work. I will see with Ulrich. If you can down one program for that, I will show you this work, and we will discuss more down in this topic, all of them about that. So I hope I answer you clearly about your question, or if you want another, I don't know, another comment.
No, yes, it's clear. It's clear.
I have a comment.
It's clear. It's clear. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Stefan, if I got your question, you meant malignant tumor they enhance after contrast. Was it your question?
Yes, I think yes.
Okay.
Is that
yes? So it doesn't mean really all malignant tumor have to take contrast. No, because that contrast can be affected also by something else. Let me just give you a simplest example about meningioma. Before contrast, they are isodense, like on CT scan, and post-contrast, they become now hyperdense. But meningioma, they are benign tumor. They are not malignant, although you can get a type of malignant meningioma, which is very rare. But in general, the meningiomas are benign. So it doesn't mean that all malignant have to take contrast, no. Because that your contrast can be even affected by giving steroid before you do your imaging. Remember when we are talking about contrast, we are seeing vessels around the tumor, okay? And your contrast can reach your lesion. Then imagine if you get like a lymphoma, primary central nervous system lymphoma, which is a malignant tumor. Then if you start by giving your steroid before you do your imaging, you won't see that lesion. You won't see it. So it doesn't mean that contrast, malignant will be seen in contrast, no. So it can be also affected by steroid. Yeah. Then about classification, it's like Dr. Noru is saying, it's a huge topic. It's a huge topic. Every tumor has to be classified. Like there are tumors where you can go up to grade 4. There are tumors it's like up to grade 3. So maybe we can arrange one day we talk about the latest classification, the 2016 WHO classification. Then we'll plan with Ulrich if we can have a talk on WHO 2016 classification of CNS tumors. Thank you so much. I have to leave you. Thank you, Dr. Nuru. It was wonderful.
You're welcome, dear Kabulo.
Thank you, Dr. Kabulo.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you, Dr. Kabulo. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I have answers. So now it's better clear in my mind.
But you're welcome. It is good. It is great pleasure for us to share our knowledge and research with you. And I hope all of you will done neurosurgery after.
I hope so.
Well. Here we have a future in colleagues. If it's not just neurosurgery, we have people for neuro anesthesia, neuropathology.
Yes, of course. Yes, neuroanesthesia, neuroreanimation, neuro-oncological. Yes.
So we have all of that.
Global surgery in some.
Yeah. So thank you to everyone. So what we're going to do for the next week, we're going to find the availability of Dr. Nuru and Dr. Kabulo, so that we can have the talk on the diffuse intrinsic pontine glioma, and we can also have the talk on the WHO classification. Obviously,
it is great.
Yeah, that will depend on their timetables. You know, they are very busy being in residency and senior residents. Some of them are chief residents as well. So we will try and get that sorted out. And as usual,
maybe next Friday you can do that next Friday.
Perfect.
Yes. To see that with Kabulo, if he is agree, we can planify that for Friday. The same times or 6 p.m. I will be free. Yes, it is good.
Okay, perfect. As always, guys, if you have something to present, get in touch with me, and we can call this a session. See you all next week, Friday.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
See you soon, and bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye, John. See you soon.